the ancient city built on cannibalism deep in the Amazon rainforest, where twisted vines strangle ancient trees and the screams of howler monkeys pierce the humid air. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a civilization so fundamentally based on human flesh consumption that every aspect of their society, from architecture to agriculture, from religion to reproduction, was designed around the systematic harvesting, processing, and consumption of human beings. This is the story of Anthropophago, a city whose very name has been lost to history, but whose practices were so horrifying that neighboring tribes spoke of it only in whispers, calling it the place where humans are cattle. A settlement of over 50,000 people who survived for more than 6 centuries by treating human flesh as their primary food source, their currency, their medicine, and their sacrament. Today, we venture into the heart of this cannibal metropolis to uncover how an entire civilization could be built on the foundation of eating human flesh, where babies were raised as livestock, where human meat markets operated in broad daylight, and where the distinction between citizen and food source depended entirely on circumstances beyond anyone's control. Our journey begins in 1952, when Brazilian explorer Dr. Carlos Mendes discovered massive stone structures hidden beneath centuries of jungle growth along the banks of an unnamed tributary of the Amazon River. What initially appeared to be another lost indigenous settlement soon revealed itself as something far more sinister, a city whose entire infrastructure had been designed around the industrial-scale processing of human flesh for consumption. The first clue came from the peculiar architecture. Unlike other ancient settlements that featured temples, palaces, or defensive walls, Anthropophago's buildings were dominated by what archaeologists initially mistook for grain storage facilities. These massive stone structures, some over 100 feet long, contained complex systems of drainage channels, stone tables, and storage chambers that made no sense until researchers realized they were looking at slaughterhouse facilities designed specifically for the systematic butchering of human beings. But Anthropophago was not a city where cannibalism occurred occasionally during famines or religious ceremonies. Archaeological evidence reveals that human flesh consumption was so fundamental to their society that they had developed sophisticated systems for what can only be described as human farming, the deliberate breeding, raising, and harvesting of people for food production. The discovery of specialized residential compounds on the city's outskirts revealed the true horror of Anthropophago's social structure. These compounds contained hundreds of small chambers, each designed to house a single individual in conditions that maximized meat production while minimizing the resources needed to maintain them. The chambers were too small for standing upright and contained feeding troughs connected to a central kitchen that prepared a diet specifically formulated to produce tender, flavorful human flesh. The inhabitants of these compounds were not prisoners or slaves in the traditional sense. They were livestock. Archaeological analysis of bones found in these chambers reveals that the people confined there showed signs of selective breeding, with skeletal characteristics that suggested generations of genetic manipulation designed to produce larger muscle mass, increased fat content, and other traits that would improve their value as food sources. carbon dating, and genetic analysis of remains found throughout the site indicate that this human farming system operated continuously for over 600 years, with each generation becoming more specialized for meat production than the last. The people of Anthropophago had essentially domesticated their own species, creating human variants that were optimized for consumption rather than survival in the wild. But the systematic farming of humans was only one aspect of Anthropophago's flesh-based economy. The city's central marketplace contained dozens of specialized shops dedicated to different aspects of human meat commerce, from butchers who specialized in particular cuts of flesh to vendors who sold human organs for medicinal purposes. The marketplace's layout reveals a sophisticated understanding of meat preservation and distribution that rivaled anything found in medieval European cities. Refrigeration chambers carved into solid rock kept flesh fresh in the tropical heat, while complex systems of salt preservation, smoking houses, and fermentation vats allowed for long-term storage of human meat products. Different cuts of human flesh commanded different prices based on age, diet, and body part. Children's flesh was considered a delicacy reserved for special occasions, while adult muscle meat served as daily sustenance for the general population. Organs were prized for their supposed medicinal properties, with human hearts believed to cure weakness and human brains thought to enhance intelligence. The city's economic records, carved into stone tablets found in administrative buildings, reveal that human flesh was not only consumed locally, but was also exported to other settlements throughout the region. Anthropophago operated trading networks that supplied preserved human meat to communities hundreds of miles away, making it the center of a regional economy based entirely on cannibalism. The religious practices of Anthropophago were inseparable from their flesh consumption, but not in ways that outsiders might expect. Rather than viewing cannibalism as a sacred act reserved for special ceremonies, the people of Anthropophago had developed a theology that treated human flesh consumption as a daily spiritual requirement necessary for maintaining their connection to divine forces. Their creation myth, decoded from temple carvings, described how the gods had made the first humans from clay and divine essence, but had determined that this divine essence could only be maintained through the consumption of other humans who carried the same godly spark. According to this theology, failing to eat human flesh regularly would cause a person's divine essence to fade, eventually reducing them to the status of animals, suitable only for consumption themselves. This belief system created a social hierarchy based entirely on cannibalism frequency and quality. The ruling class consumed the finest cuts of human flesh daily, maintaining their divine status and political authority through superior nutrition. Lower social classes had access to less desirable cuts and organs, while the bottom tier of society survived on scraps and eventually became food sources themselves when their divine essence weakened sufficiently. The temples of Anthropophago contained kitchens rather than altars, where priests prepared elaborate meals using human flesh as the primary ingredient. Religious ceremonies consisted of communal feasts where the consumption of specially prepared human dishes was believed to strengthen the community's connection to divine forces and ensure their continued prosperity. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Anthropophago's cannibalistic society was how it affected family relationships and child-rearing practices. In normal societies, parents protect their children from harm and provide for their needs. In Anthropophago, parents were required to make calculations about which of their children would be raised as family members and which would be designated as future food sources. These decisions were made shortly after birth based on physical characteristics, astrological considerations, and family economic needs. Children designated for consumption were treated with care and affection, but their upbringing was specifically designed to optimize their eventual use as food. They received diets formulated to improve meat quality, physical training designed to develop desirable muscle groups, and psychological conditioning that made them accepting of their ultimate fate. Family records found in residential areas reveal that it was common for parents to consume their own children during special celebrations or times of economic hardship. These acts were not viewed as tragic necessities, but as expressions of love and family unity, with the consumed children believed to become part of their family's divine essence permanently. Children who were not designated for consumption grew up in an environment where eating human flesh was as normal as eating any other food. They participated in the butchering of family members from early childhood, learned to prepare human flesh dishes as part of their basic education, and developed preferences for different types of human meat based on personal taste and cultural traditions. The psychological impact of growing up in such an environment created adults who were completely desensitized to human suffering and death, but who also possessed an unusual capacity for emotional detachment that allowed them to maintain loving relationships with people they might eventually consume. Archaeological evidence suggests that these psychological adaptations were passed down genetically, creating a population that was biologically suited for their cannibalistic lifestyle. The agricultural practices of Anthropophago were also shaped by their dependence on human flesh consumption. Rather than developing traditional farming techniques for growing crops, they focused on cultivating plants that would improve the flavor and nutritional value of human meat when used as feed for their human livestock. Specialized farms surrounding the city grew herbs and grains that were fed exclusively to humans designated for consumption, with different crops used to create different flavors of meat. Some farms produced sweet-tasting additives that made children's flesh more palatable, while others grew bitter herbs that were believed to make adult meat more tender. The city's farmers developed expertise in human nutrition that was far advanced for their time, understanding how different diets affected meat quality, how exercise programs could develop specific muscle groups, and how psychological states influenced the taste and texture of flesh. This knowledge was carefully guarded and passed down through generations of families who specialized in human husbandry. But Anthropophago's dependence on human flesh consumption ultimately proved to be its downfall. As neighboring tribes became aware of the city's practices, they formed military alliances specifically designed to destroy what they viewed as an abomination against human nature. The constant warfare needed to defend against these alliances, combined with the city's inability to develop sustainable food production methods that didn't depend on human flesh, gradually weakened their civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that Anthropophago's final years were marked by internal conflict as food shortages forced previously exempt social classes to consider consuming each other. The careful social hierarchies that had maintained order for centuries collapsed as everyone became potential food sources, leading to civil war and eventual abandonment of the city around 1450 AD. The ruins of Anthropophago were quickly reclaimed by the jungle, and local tribes systematically destroyed any evidence of the city's existence that they could find. Only the massive stone structures were too large to demolish completely, remaining hidden beneath vegetation until modern archaeologists accidentally discovered them over 500 years later. When Dr. Mendes and his team first uncovered the evidence of systematic cannibalism at Anthropophago, they initially refused to believe their findings. The scale and organization of human flesh consumption was so far beyond anything previously documented that it challenged basic assumptions about human nature and social development. Subsequent research by international teams of archaeologists, anthropologists, and psychologists has confirmed that Anthropophago represents a unique case in human history, a civilization that successfully organized itself around cannibalism for over 6 centuries, developing social, economic, and religious institutions that treated human flesh consumption as normal and necessary for survival. The discovery of Anthropophago has forced scholars to confront uncomfortable questions about human adaptability and the potential for societies to normalize practices that seem fundamentally contrary to human nature. The people of Anthropophago were not primitive savages or psychopathic killers. They were sophisticated individuals who developed complex technologies, beautiful art, and stable social institutions while treating cannibalism as an ordinary aspect of daily life. Today, the ruins of Anthropophago remain largely inaccessible to the general public, hidden deep in protected rainforest where Brazilian authorities restrict access to qualified researchers. The site serves as a disturbing reminder that human societies can adapt to almost any circumstances, even those that require the systematic consumption of their own species. As we emerge from the shadows of this cannibal metropolis and return to our world where eating human flesh is universally condemned, we carry with us the unsettling knowledge that the line between civilization and barbarity may be thinner than we ever imagined. The people of Anthropophago lived, loved, raised families, created art, and built lasting institutions while treating other humans as livestock, proving that our most fundamental moral assumptions about human nature may be more culturally determined than we'd like to believe. The most chilling legacy of Anthropophago may be the question it raises about our own society. If circumstances were different, if our culture had developed along different lines, if our survival had depended on different choices, would we have been capable of creating our own version of the city built on cannibalism? The ruins hidden in the Amazon rainforest suggest that the answer might be yes, and that realization may be the most disturbing discovery of all.